The mind is in our whole bodies. So, this focus is through, even when I'm sitting and speaking now. And to make a point, if I hold up a hand like this, it's how aware I am and what kind of energy can I channelize only through my fingers and through my gaze, the connection between these things. Stage presence, in other words, awareness of one's own energy.
No rain. Hello, folks. So welcome back to the Naren Agarwal Show. Today's episode. If you are interested to inspire and instigate the warrior within you, you got to check this episode out. I have with me a theater performer and a Kalaripayattu, whatever you say it, one of the most ancient martial arts of the world practitioner. He's a runner and he's also a coach who inspires you to inspire the warrior within you and live a warrior mentality. So guys, without further ado, inviting Mr. Arka Mukhopadhyay on the show. Arkoda, welcome.
Thank you, Naren. Good to be here.
Arkoda, what do you mean by inspiring the inner warrior? Tell me about that first before we get started and learn about Kalaripayattu.
Sure. I'm going to actually turn the question back at you, that when you hear the word warrior, what comes to your mind first? Like, give me some adjectives. What comes up?
I sense going outside your comfort zone.
Okay. Brilliant.
Facing the inner demons, actually. I think it's so much about facing the inner demons and outside, the inner fears.
Right.
These are something that come to my mind.
Right. Okay. And give me one or two names. It could be like, mythological characters or religious, historical, present day living people that you can think of as a warrior.
Wow. I think for some reason, Bruce Lee comes to my mind.
Yes, of course. Yeah, no surprises there, of course. And
I would say Shivaji Maharaj from Maharashtra, India.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, of course, this is my take or my understanding on this idea of the inner warrior. But before I get into explaining that, what if I, as an example of a warrior, if I spoke about, let's say, Gandhi or the Buddha, or let's say Mirabai.
Wow.
Would you think of them as warriors? I mean, we normally wouldn't, but does this make sense? If I say that Gandhi was a warrior, if I say the Buddha was a warrior, if I say Mirabai, who maybe if some of your audience does not know, then she was this medieval devotional poetess and woman saint from India. So yeah, this is for your international audience. So yeah, would we think of her as a warrior, for example?
Wow, that's a very intriguing question. I've never thought about it, and right off the bat, I probably wouldn't think of them as a
warrior. Right. Yes, and that's fine. But so of course, my explorations of this archetype, because that's what it is, right? So in psychology, we have different kinds of archetypes that Jung spoke about, and how we can work with those archetypes. So we have the king, the hero, the shaman, and so on and so forth. Excuse me. My interest in this persona, this archetype of the warrior, that is obviously connected with my practice of martial arts of Kalaripayattu, which is, it goes back about 12 years now. But it so happened that as I got deeper into that practice, I realized that it is not only about the physical practice, which is fantastic and which gives us a lot, but it's not just about that. It's rather a certain inner dimension which opens up when you practice any martial art, I guess, because if you begin to think about it, you'll see that martial arts in all cultures are deeply connected with the corresponding spiritual or philosophical tradition. I mean, Kung Fu is connected with both pre-Buddhist, like what they call Taoism in China, the whole yin-yang thing, that symbol, and a lot else besides. So Tai Chi and Kung Fu are deeply connected with that spiritual tradition. Taekwondo is connected with Korean traditional spiritual beliefs, and karate, of course, is connected with Shintoism, and then Buddhism, of course. In all these countries, Buddhism became huge, so the whole Zen thing is
Correct.
so. Similarly, Calorie also, and Calorie is quite possibly the oldest of them all, as you mentioned in your introduction. That it probably is, it definitely is the oldest in India, the oldest in South Asia. It probably is the oldest existing martial art in the world, and it has a deep spiritual foundation. As we say, we practitioners, that Calorie is not just martial art, it's a way of being. So gradually my interest turned deeper into that, into this inner aspect of the martial artist's journey. And that a martial artist is a warrior. A warrior is not a soldier. There's a critical difference between the two. A soldier, not to demean in any way, but a soldier is somebody who's part of a kind of a hierarchical system, and it's based on command and control and, you know, power over others, the chain of command, etc. It's not about the individual spiritual journey. There's a lot of honor and glory and all of that, but that's, you know, the warrior is somebody different. I mean, we, you know, mythological characters, we think about Juna, etc., etc. Achilles in the West. The warrior is a much more individualistic figure and values the principles that the warrior embodies. Those are very important in the warrior's journey. So then I started questioning myself that, especially in this day and age, when it is not really about fighting physical battles anymore, and it is not about violence. So what is this inner persona of the warrior, the archetype of the warrior? What is that about? And so this idea of the warrior within is to connect with and to embody certain fundamental values. And what are those values? Truth, and to whatever your truth happens to be, but truth, and to live in the service of that truth, to kind of, you know, strive for meaning, to live a purposeful life. And even though we connect martial arts with fighting and violence, but actually to live a life of kindness and compassion and service to the greater good. It does not negate the idea of self-compassion, etc. But yes, to be a warrior is in a way to put others before self, to serve a greater, you know, common good, so to say. So, and I could be a startup founder, I could be an entrepreneur, and there's nothing wrong with my wanting certain things out of that for myself also. But still, I'm doing that not just to generate, you know, X amount of revenue and make a 10x exit or something, but rather, am I truly trying to make a difference for others? So for me, these are, so in a way, these are leadership values. I mean, you know, I connect the figure of the leader in organizational context with this image of the warrior. So it all goes back. I mean, the Indian tradition has this beautiful, amazing capability of expressing deep truths in a few words. So this whole notion of the warrior actually, for me, just condenses down into truth, goodness, and beauty, which is Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram. So to embody and to live those values. And this beauty is very curious. We're not like beauty warrior, but yes, a sense of harmony, a sense of joy, a sense of, yeah, joy in life, in the world. So that's part of the warrior's journey as well. So it's not just doing something for the heck of doing it. So Calorie is a deadly martial art, but it's also deeply graceful. It's a very beautiful martial art. So to do something
like a dance when I've seen it, and that's why it's one of the most intriguing martial arts to me.
It is not a dance. That's the thing. It looks like one because it's
like a dance.
Continuous movements and all that. But each and everything, and this is a very common misconception these days. There's a different history, and I'll share the history of the form also. But fact of the matter is that anything and everything about Calorie is quite deadly. Like what looks very sinuous and graceful and fluid, but with each and everything, Calorie is always, you know, the whole idea is in terms of the body, like attacking or defending these vital pressure points. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a very deadly form.
Wow. So let's get into Calorie and learning about it. So why don't you tell us about the history of Calorie? I have heard from some sources that Agastya Muni, one of the Saptarishis of India, he's the one who invented Calorie. But there's many streams of thought. So why don't we learn about how did Calorie come into being, and then get into the science and the mechanics of Calorie?
Yeah, absolutely. So first about the name itself. The name itself is quite beautiful. I mean, what does it mean? So the word Calorie literally means a learning place. It's not confined to martial arts. Any place where you learn is a Calorie. So school is a Calorie. In the north, we say Pathshala in Bangla. We also say Akhada in Hindi.
Correct.
Yeah. And Akhada is where you could learn wrestling, or you could also learn the Vedas, for example, a Shala and Akhada, etc. A Calorie is a learning space, first thing. Payat, the pronunciation in Malayalam is like, a little unique. So yeah, it's like you could just say Payat like that. You kind of trip over the last sound a little. That literally means the art of battle or the art of war. Quite literally the art of war, like the book, Sun Tzu's book. So it literally, Calorie Payat, it means the place for practicing, learning or practicing the art of war. Okay. And the place where you learn is called a Calorie. Like in Akhada, so the physical space where we learn in Kerala, it's from Kerala, for those of your audience who do not know. So Calorie originates from what is now the state of Kerala, which is the southernmost, actually, is the southwesternmost part of India. But being as ancient as it is, obviously these geopolitical divisions are much more recent. It's just 70 years ago after independence. But so parts of what's the state of Tamil Nadu that Calorie also was native to those areas. Very, very old, because there's mention of Calorie in ancient literature from the south of India, dating back about 2000 years at least. So in the Tamil language, in ancient Tamil, there's a famous body of literary texts collectively called the Sangam literature, actually. And these are poems, stories, anecdotes, etc. And some of those actually mention Calorie as well. So very, very old. Kind of rose to prominence. And so the founding, at present, there are two principal styles of Calorie. Like Kung Fu has different styles, and Karate has different styles. So it's called Northern and Southern, Vadakkan and Thekkan, respectively. This refers just to the north of the Kerala region and the south of it. It's not like north of India or south of India. Okay. And the people who practice northern style of Calorie believe that it was created by another sage who is in fact known as a warrior sage, Parashuraman, and who you probably know is like known for his wrath. He was very angry and he killed all the kings in the world, some 21 times and stuff like that. Yeah. And the south of this Kerala and parts of Tamil Nadu, that region, there Agastya Muni, who is, one of the Saptarishis of India, he is revered more. And the southern style of Calorie, which is in fact what I now practice, I started with the northern style, but for many years now I've been doing the southern style. So Agastya Muni is revered more in the southern style. So they are the same martial art, but two very distinct schools within that, with certain differences. So to quickly kind of, gloss over the story of Calorie. So yeah, it goes back at least 2000 years, rose to prominence at a time period about 1200 to 1000 years ago. So for about 100 years, there's like ongoing pitched wars among these three huge southern dynasties. The Cholas, who are very well known. Then the Chera dynasty. So the name Kerala comes from the Chera kings, actually. It was the Chera country, and they left their name. So the Chera dynasty, they are mentioned as far back as the Mahabharata. So the Cheras are mentioned in the Mahabharata also. And then there was a third dynasty called the Pandyas. And Pandyans, they're kind of like, the deep south of Tamil Nadu. Like Madurai was their capital, actually. So all these three dynasties, there were like battles going on in between, and that is the period when Kalari became the art of the elite warriors. It was never among common soldiers. It was something belonging to elite warrior castes, clans. And so that's when it really came to prominence. And then in the Middle Ages, the 15th, 16th centuries, we hear stories about almost like the superheroes of today, the Marvel superheroes and all that. So there is semi-mythical, semi-legendary heroes, especially in the northern part of Kerala, what is called North Malabar, that region, including a few women. So Kerala society always has, women have had a more powerful presence there than in many other parts of India. Right. It's certain Kerala communities, including some of the communities which practice Kalari, are actually matrilineal.
Yes, that's what I've heard. It's matriarchal in nature, right? And the lineage
is everywhere. That's true, but it's still matrilineal, as in the property passes to the female line, to the youngest daughter. And therefore, in spite of the patriarchy, in certain communities, women became exceedingly powerful. They actually even practiced polyandry. There's certain communities where women had multiple, it's not even marriage. They called it by different, it's more like association. It's just cohabitation. And they could choose partners. They could, so to say, divorce. And these households would be under the, so to say, the leadership of a matriarch, as in like, an old lady who would be like the queen of the realm of that particular household, essentially. A bit like elephant communities. And elephants are so strong in Kerala, so maybe people follow them. But I'm just joking. But it's like that. It's like that women were very powerful within certain communities, not all communities. Overall, society was patriarchal, but certain communities, especially the ones that practiced Kalari, were heavily matriarchal. And within Kalari, Kalari is a martial art. It's a very powerful martial art. And yet there's this beautiful balance of the masculine and the feminine, because what the Kalari practitioner aims to do, other than fighting, what he or she, because women have always been doing Kalari. They've never been barred from doing Kalari. And so girls across a wide swathe of Kerala society used to learn up to a certain age, up to puberty, etc. After that, not many continued, but still. What the Kalari warrior tries to do is to awaken Shakti, the feminine principle, the feminine spirit within. Because it also has connections to Tantra practice. In Kerala, that is also very strong. They call it Sri Vidya over there. So awakening the feminine principle of power. So Shakti is worshipped in Kalari, etc. So this balance of Purusha and Prakriti, masculine and feminine, is very beautifully present in Kalari, which is why you also see the movements are so graceful and it looks like that. Absolutely. Jumping forward quickly a few centuries, now what happened, as with so many other things, is that in the 19th century, early 19th century, when the British were trying to abolish the ruling dynasties of Kerala, like everywhere else in the country, they used all these tactics, doctrine of lapse and this and that, and capture the land. Kalari started to be used as a kind of guerrilla tactic against, there were one or two specific heroes in Kerala who were fighting against the British in this guerrilla way. So they would just materialize out of nowhere and, in the jungles or something maybe, and then like devastate and then melt away again. So the British prohibited the practice of Kalari. They passed something called the Malabar Weapons or Malabar Ordnance Act or something in the 1820s. And so the point was that you could not carry weapons. So the communities which practice Kalari, just like the samurai in Japan, so the history is very similar to the shogunate in Japan. So the communities there were several, but mainly, so this community called the Nayar, so you still find people from Kerala with that Nayar surname. So the Nayars were the community that primarily practiced Kalari, and the Nayar men especially were allowed to, as well as required to, carry a sword at all times in ages gone by. So in the 16th century, we find the first European account of this. There's this Portuguese traveler called Barbosa, Duarte Barbosa, who came to Kerala. That's when the Portuguese started coming, Vasco da Gama, etc. And he writes about the practice of, he calls it boxing, I suppose, like local boxing, but he's talking about Kalaripayattu as it was practiced in the 1500s. So they would always go around wearing their sword, just as the samurais would. So these guys were comparable to that. Now the British banned this, carrying of any sorts of weapons, keeping and teaching of weapons, and much of the practice besides. So they killed many people for the old teachers. A teacher in Calorie is either called a Gurukul, or like in North India, we say Guruji, there they say Gurukul, or Ashan. That's also a Tamil word. Ashan also means master. Like we say Acharya or something in Sanskrit or Hindi. Ashan is the word, especially in southern Calorie, we say Ashan. So many of the old Ashans, the Gurukuls, were killed. Many were shot through the knee, so they couldn't practice or teach anymore. Typical colonial stuff. In Bengal, they chopped off thumbs of the weavers. So just like that, they shot people through the knee, crippled them. Only in the late 1920s, early 1930s, it started getting revived. Obviously, as a kind of health and fitness and lifestyle practice. There were some, again, aristocratic young men it never completely stopped. A lot of the old knowledge was lost, but yes, people were practicing teaching and all that. And now it started getting revived and slowly picked up in popularity post-independence, etc. But the sad thing is, a bit of a shameful thing, and from the Indian perspective, is that here is the world's oldest martial art. It's our own heritage. But outside of Kerala or outside of the South, most people haven't even heard about it, forget knowing how to pronounce it and stuff.
Shocking. Exactly.
Whereas even in any small town in North India, you'd probably find a karate school or a taekwondo or something like that. And nothing against that. Those are beautiful traditions and great forms. But this is our own, and this is the world's oldest. And it goes back probably to the time of the Mahabharata, for all we know. Because Calorie traces its origin from an ancient text called the Dhanur Veda, which is in turn part of certain Puranas. It's part of something called the Agni Purana, supposedly was composed by Parshuram. Archery was the noblest of all the weapons, all the arts. Archery, I mean, you look at the Mahabharata, the noblest warriors are the archers, right? Out of all of them,
so true.
Arjuna and Karna are the noblest because they are the archers. So that was a feature of Indian civilization somehow. Other parts of the world, the sword was the noblest weapon. Here, somehow the bow and arrow was always considered the noblest. But that knowledge was lost from Calorie. 18th, 19th centuries. So now nobody reading. There are people making some efforts to reconstruct or rediscover, mainly there are many ancient texts, like little palm leaf manuscripts that some of the Calorie families, like the Gurukuls, have with them and stuff. But by and large, it is lost. Calorie also had the chakram, by the way, the discus, which in reality, nobody does it like that. That's what we think from images of Krishna. How you throw the chakram is you hold it like this and you throw it like that. So it's supposed to go and strike your target somewhere in the throat, etc. Nobody does it like
a
this.
ninja star. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like the ninjas also had a very similar weapon, this tiny little wheel shape, yes, which they would throw, and it would typically strike the person in the throat and kill them instantly, like right here. So the chakram is also, or you do it like that. Just like throwing a frisbee, you throw it like this, but it could decapitate a person. Big stuff. It's something like this, and with like razor sharp serrated edges. So you hold it like that and you throw it like this and take off somebody's head. It's a martial art. It's, yeah. No, and the thing is, in ancient times, it was used in battle, but also there's this very particular feature, but that's supposed to clans, because it's not really, when we say kingdoms and all, Kerala itself is a fairly small place. So effectively these are clans or tribes. Two tribes have a feud. Yeah. And instead of an all-out battle where there's, large-scale loss of life, each side would choose a champion. It's just like the Bible where you see the David and Goliath story. Each side chooses a champion, and it's a battle unto death. And whoever remains alive his side is considered the winner. So it's a fight unto death. This was called an ankam. And there were specific communities who practiced only for this. So interestingly, these were so-called lower caste communities, untouchables at times. But if they became like these fighters committed to taking part in the ankams for their local chieftain or king, so then these people were called 𝐀𝐠𝐽. And so, yeah, their lives were essentially forfeit, as in at any point of time, they could be called upon and they could die like gladiators. So, like everything else, this was hereditary. But at the same time, lot of wealth, lot of honor, etc., etc. So there was this past to Calorie also. So all these. Anyway, so that's like a very, very brief story of Kalaripayattu. And the only thing that remains to say is that, in spite of all this history of fighting and bloodshed, but what's most important, in my opinion, what is most important about the form is the inner honor code that it carries. So, like the first thing that is even now taught to you when you go to learn Calorie is that you're never going to use it. Definitely not for yourself. I've had more than one teacher. So anyway, one of my teachers put it all of them have said the same thing in different ways. One of them just said that in any situation of conflict, even when you are in the right, you feel you're in the right, you just kind of say, okay, well, you're right, and you get away from that. So it's about conquering your ego. It's about self-restraint, the need to be right. It's about humility. Doesn't mean we bow down to injustice and oppression. This is like, for myself, I'm not going to use it. Even when I need to use it to the last extent possible, Calorie is a defensive art. That's what we say. It's a defensive art. So you defend. You try not to hurt the person. You essentially try to get away. All martial arts actually say this, that the best fight is the one that you don't take part in. Simple as that. Yeah.
I've noticed that a lot of these Eastern martial arts, especially China, Japan, a lot of these South Asian martial arts have a strong value system. And I think that's because of the spiritual grounding it has. So it empowers you with humility as opposed to empower you with your ego. It empowers your skill and ability, at the same time works on deflating your ego.
Absolutely.
Because it really makes you a great individual and a great human, and asset to others.
Absolutely.
And
everything has a light side and a shadow side. So martial arts somehow were always the preserve of certain communities in any culture. It's not just here because of the caste system. In Japan, it's the same thing. Only the Bushido practiced it, and Kung Fu was only the Shaolin monks, and so on and so forth. Common people seldom had access, and all this thing of mystery and arcaneness and, secret knowledge, esotericism, etc., etc. I mean, the more people have access to martial arts, actually there'll be less violence in the world, because funnily enough, it takes away your aggression. It's a slow process, but I've seen it in my own life, because I used to have a lot of anger issues when I was younger. When I was your age.
so now that you bring this up, by the way, I don't think anybody will believe you're 40 because you don't look like it at all. So that's a very surprising thing.
Well,
now that you bring this up, I wanted to ask you this question. You've practiced Calorie for the past 12 years. 12 years is a lot. It's like a solar cycle. What difference has Calorie brought into your life, and why do you still continue practicing it?
It brought in many differences, starting from the physical, the outermost plane, because I was never into any kind of physical practice. You're from Kolkata, so I was a typical bookish, the stereotype, the typical bookish Bengali. I was more into that. I had absolutely no connection with my body, other than typically playing cricket in the gullies when I was young. That's it. That was not too well. I was not good at sports or anything. I was into quizzing, I was into debating, everything that's intellectual, I was into that. And then I got into theater, of course. That's a whole different story. I mean, these two journeys are intertwined for me, but then that's another journey. And it was because of theater that I discovered Calorie. As you probably know, actors, dancers, we try to pick up different practices to train ourselves, body, voice, expression, etc., etc. So when I started Calorie, physically, I was not capable of much at all, or rather, like, I didn't think I was capable. I did not have flexibility. I did not have stamina, and blah, 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 blah. So at a physical level, the 40-year-old me is far stronger, has far more endurance, flexibility, etc., than the 25 or 26-year-old me. I started running very seriously a couple of years ago, and in a way, I credit my Calorie practice that in a pretty short span of time, I've been able to, as an amateur and somewhat older runner, of course, but I've been able to make decent progress as a runner in a fairly short time, and that is because of the the body awareness and also certain mental, because running is a mind game, like running kilometer after kilometer is the mind which gives up, not the body. So the mental control that Calorie has given. So that's one part of it, the physical part of it. It has also brought a certain kind of awareness, not just when I'm doing Calorie, but awareness of my body, a certain embodied awareness, let's just say. Like when I'm sitting or the gestures that I'm making, it's not self-consciousness, it's self-awareness. Those are two different things. And that has, of course, helped as an actor. It has also helped us. I mean, I do a lot of professional work in the corporate realm, training, coaching, etc. So it has, as a public speaker, it has definitely helped in that, because even speaking ultimately is not a cerebral act. It's an embodied act. Hardly any public speaking course actually looks at that aspect, but it's an embodied act. It's about your spine and how you stand and your breath. So it has heightened my stage presence actually by enhancing my awareness of my body and the space around me. So the relationship between the body and the space, and holding a certain kind of energy, just how to stand, how to own the space, how to move around in a certain way, so that, you know, if you want to, you keep the attention on yourself, and if you don't want to, then you can be very unobtrusive somewhere. That's at, how do I put it? That is also mental in a way, yeah, in a sort of body mind kind of way. It has definitely increased focus and attention and mindfulness, because ultimately Calorie, I keep saying, is a kind of embodied meditation. It's a moving meditation. All martial arts again, because we do fairly challenging and difficult things with the body. So ultimately what that really demands is a heightened focus of the mind. But the mind is in our whole bodies. So, you know, this focus is through, even when I'm sitting and speaking now, and to make a point, if I hold up a hand like this, it's how aware I am and what kind of energy can I channelize only through my fingers and through my gaze, the connection between these things, stage presence, in other words, awareness of one's own energy. You know, so even when I'm sitting and speaking or standing, taking a training session, in a way I'm doing Calorie, as in the inner energy, the inner principle of Calorie. So when you go, I wouldn't have gone very deep. I still consider myself, like, you know, I'll be a lifelong student, still consider myself a beginner. But at a certain point, the practice is not just about the practice. It sounds very mystical and cryptic and all that, but no, the practice is not just about the practice. I mean, if you go deep enough into singing, then there comes a time when you hear and maybe see the sa in everything. The inner principles are the same, whether it's horse riding or singing Hindustani classical, but the fundamental inner principles of things, I can connect Calorie to startups and to design and whatnot. Just this morning, I was taking an online class, and one of my students is a designer, and we're talking about how it is kind of like design with the body and so on and so forth. It is, because any deep enough human practice ultimately goes down to certain basic fundamental principles, you know. So like that. So I could be sitting or standing and looking, and it's all Kalari. The inner principles of being present, of paying attention. So Kalari is not about doing. It's a martial art, so it's, kicking and punching and so much, but it's not about the doing. It's about a state, a perceptive state. It's listening and looking with the body. Kalari has a beautiful saying. The original Malayalam I'll mispronounce. I'm not going to do that, but the English translation is a state when the body becomes all eyes. When the body becomes all eyes.
Wow.
Literally, this is like you're a warrior, you're fighting. At times you may be fighting, 5 people. So you need to have that, like the hunters or the fighters state of the lateral vision, everything. But metaphorically, and the metaphor is what matters. Metaphorically, it means so much more than that. It means that communication, which is your forte, is really about listening. Communication is not about me, it's about the other person. Presence, leadership presence, such a big thing these days, executive presence. My presence has got nothing to do with me. Presence is how I make the other person feel.
Wow.
How the other person feels when I'm present is what my presence is, right?
So true.
What is the quality of energy that I bring into something? Am I truly listening? Or, sometimes even when we're not saying anything, but there's so much going on inside our own heads, we don't really see, we don't really perceive. So to that ability at times to be able to quieten the mind and to truly listen, to truly watch, because that's what acting also is, funnily enough. I think acting is being on stage or in front of the camera and taking lines and speaking. But the truth is, acting is a more difficult task of listening because the audience doesn't speak. But without speaking, it says a lot. And can I gauge the pulse of the audience? Can I truly listen to their silence? Because that's what really differentiates an ordinary performance from a good one, from a great one. Again, whether it's camera or stage in a way is live. Each has its own challenges. Can I truly receive the silence of the audience? Because it's a very living silence. They're not dead. They're sitting there and breathing and giving you their time and attention. And can you take that attention and respond to that? And Calorie has helped me tremendously, even in terms of words, because the physical actions demand a lot of precision, body, mind, eye coordination, etc. And hence this ability to tune the mind. So then you can transfer that same capability to when you're speaking also. It's again not artificial, it's not a put on thing or something, it just means awareness. You pick and choose your words, you're aware of what you're saying as you're saying it, the music of your words. So I do teach public speaking as well, and I don't talk about 4 rules and 5 strategies and stuff like that. It's an inside out thing. It's mindfulness. Can I speak with mindfulness? And can I listen more than speak? Can I, stand with compassion towards my audience who's in front of me? Or also, like right now, the two of us are telling a story. I'm primarily telling it to you, but we have in mind that, hundreds of people are going to watch it also. And I can tell my story in a way that it only makes sense to me, but then the person seeing this on YouTube, what value will they? So what value am I creating for the other person in that moment? So you see, these are the changes it has brought. It has actually literally changed my life. Has it made me super rich or something? No, that's not what changing one's life is about. It's about how in each and every moment, how I look at the world and how I relate to it. So Calorie has given me a different from what it used to be, say, in my 20s. Calorie has given me a very specific, a very deep frame of looking at the world, of processing my experiences, of responding to them or not responding to them.
Wow. It really is, it's very powerful when you say that it doesn't, it's not the fact that you got rich, but it gave you a way to relate with and enhance every moment of your life. And that's such a powerful statement, because we don't recognize that it's these moments of life that make a great day, and a lot of great days make a great week, and a lot of great weeks make a great year, and a lot of
Absolutely.
great years make a great life.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
the fact that you've
Because
learned a
other
course called
things.
great moments, and Calorie has given you great moments, that's beautiful.
Yes, yes. And in fact, to answer your final question, you asked, why do I continue to practice? First of all, I continue to practice because I still have a lot left to learn. These things are like oceans. It's a lifelong practice. There's certain weapons, like, I chose not to pick up weapons for a long time. So it's only in the recent past that I've started doing the sword and shield. And that's a different journey altogether. Again, it's not about violence. The day you first stand with a sword and a shield in your hand, something very ancient and primal comes out of you. Not something violent, but there's a very primal, very ancient energy of the warrior, the huntsman, the ancient warrior inside each one of us. We all carry those DNAs in some form or the other, right? And so it's kind of imprinted in what's called the id, the collective unconscious. And it's not really possible to describe it in words. To stand with the sword in your hand, it doesn't bring out aggression, brings out something very strange, what you experience, like another presence deeper within you. So I've been doing it only like, in the last couple of years. And then this year, of course, was entirely gone. I mean, 2020 was gone altogether for obvious reasons. Other than January, I didn't get to go to Kerala. Otherwise, I go once every 2 months or something, stay there for 10 days practice. But why do I practice is connected with this question of changing one's life, because change is also not a binary state. It's not a 0 and 1. Change is an ongoing process. This is something when we very loosely use the words change and transformation these days. We kind of think of it as a switch. But like if I, press the end switch right now, the coal is going to end. It's not like that. Change is like a flowing river. It's not a puddle. It goes on and it goes on as long as your life lasts. If we are open to it, we are changing each and every moment, whether we like it or not, whether we know it or not, whether we want to or not. The question is, am I doing so with awareness and intention? So this word intention is amazing, is a very fundamental, important word, which again in martial arts practice will give you, to do things with intention. So I continue to practice because even now, whether I'm teaching or practicing myself and practicing maybe even the first elementary forms, I continue to gain new insights in it. Something different about the body that I hadn't noticed in all these years, or about the flow and the connection of one step to another. They may not make any sense to anybody other than me. It may be a very, very tiny technical point, but it matters. It's not about what practical value it has in the world. Again, these practices, especially the martial arts, they're not really about martial arts, Zen, calligraphy, something like the tea ceremony in Japan. These are very intentionally, they are quite useless in the sense that it's got no practical use in the world. The use is very different. What I learn by suddenly gaining a new insight into a particular Calorie move, for example, is ultimately about something about my own mind and my consciousness. And I learn how I learn. The process of learning. As a teacher, I'm deeply interested in that. Wow. I continue to practice because I discover new ways to teach, for example. And teaching is sense making. It's not about teaching Calorie, the technique. It could be design, it could be something else. It's about the penny drop moment in the other person's mind. So how do I teach? It's communication again. How do I help them see something, make those neural connections happen? Wow. So which is why I continue to practice and to go on. And that is the other thing that Calorie has given, that we practice to practice, that it's like an ongoing process of evolution, of constantly going deeper into the self in relation to the world. Strangely enough, that, well, I'm Bengali, so everything brings Tagore to mind, but one of his most famous songs in English translation, it begins with something like that, this process of knowing myself will never end. And the more I get to know myself, the more I know you. So the you he refers to as God, but think of it as the world spirit, something like that. Martial arts is so much about discipline, and initially you approach the discipline in an external way. It's repetition, it's doing by rote. And just to wrap up very quickly, because I think this is powerful again, that as you go on, you discover that discipline actually is a lot about love. As in, we can only be truly disciplined, not like, that's why I'm not talking about the word. These days, we said a lot of things about habit and 5 a.m. club and all that. See, a habit is very mechanistic. It's like I'm doing it for external reasons.
Correct.
But true discipline comes only when there's a deep love for what I'm doing. So discipline is just the visible, manifest part of love,
That's beautiful.
actually. And that's true for anything.
Beautiful.
It could be true of a person, because there are two ends to this. One is that in practices, we think it is only about the craft and not about the emotion at all. That's not true. And that's something Calorie has taught me. And it's not just about doing what you love, it's also about finding ways to love what you do. That's very important. I'm lucky that I do somewhat unusual things, and that's a privilege. And I acknowledge that. And not everybody has that privilege. It's perfectly okay to do something with your motivators being putting food on the table. It's a very noble thing to do. Because these days we shame these things a lot. Like, what are you doing if you're not traveling? That I think is a somewhat toxic culture, like this thing about the exotic, etc. No, I mean, at least I can speak of my previous generation, people of my father's generation. They did things, I mean, that was the typical middle class India, just to put food on the table. But it is possible to find ways to find meaning and to love what you do. And that's something Calorie has taught. On the other hand, when it comes to human relationships, we think it is only about the spontaneity, and that if we intentionally practice certain things, that's artificial, but it's not. Anything that's deep enough also needs to be practiced. Zen meditation needs to be practiced. So similarly, kindness, compassion, and yes, love in any human sense, not just romantic. These are things that ought to be practiced with intention. And that doesn't make it any less authentic, it makes it more. So these are all, strangely enough, life lessons from practicing a martial art.
That is amazing, because when you were saying all this, so many of my questions were covered, because every martial arts teaches some values. You covered that. You spoke about life lessons that you got from the martial arts. So thank you so much. It's almost magical in a way that you answered so many questions that I had and had prepared without me putting them forward.
I'm glad.
Thank
I'm
you.
glad.
What I really loved is that you said, and it was really insightful for me, that discipline requires love. Habit is mechanical, it's external. And it made me reflect on certain things that I do. And I wouldn't call it a habit, certain meditation practices that I do almost religiously every day. And it's not a habit, but it's just, I love to do it. And it comes out of certain reverence that I
Yeah.
have in myself.
It's good to start from a place of habits, nothing wrong with that. We need to make a start somewhere. And so I'm not decrying, I mean, these days, there are a lot of programs, which this whole idea that 21 days it takes to form a habit and all that. I'm a little scared from my own journeys, and because I've been lucky enough to gain slightly deeper insights into certain things. We get seduced by these figures, the numbers. Ours is a very label-driven age and society. So 21 days and 10,000 hours. It's not about the 21 days and the 10,000 hours. You could spend 10,000 hours practicing the wrong thing. I think that also similar to something Bruce Lee said. He said something else, that I'm not scared of the man who's practiced 10,000 different kicks. I'm scared of the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times. Yes, yeah, that is a really scary person. But even that, we could practice the wrong thing 10,000 times. It's not that. It's with what intention, with what quality of presence am I practicing it? What is the reason for, and these are not external. This what is the reason is not like some vision and mission statement I have. These are almost impossible to express in words. There are layers of experience in life which are sadly or thankfully beyond the scope of words. We understand them with the body, we understand them with experience. When we go to the Himalayas in winter, and if you see like Nanda Devi wrapped in snow, then yeah, we can talk about it and write poetry. But the experience is something that lies beyond any words. Same here. You could start from habit formation, etc. But what I see when I look around in our age is that even spirituality, and spirituality sells these days, and it's a huge industry, but even spirituality is something that we're doing in a kind of external way as a formula, and with some motive. And I would say that if you're practicing spirituality or mindfulness with a motive that is self-defeating, that sounds weird because, how can I be purposeless and all of that? It is nevertheless true. If you're practicing something, because the moment there is a motive, you're looking at something which is not in the here and now. When I practice Calorie, in that moment, only that moment exists. Yeah. So when I'm just doing something or I'm punching, and in that moment, there is nothing else. My whole attention, my whole presence flows through my fist in that moment, right? So when I practice spirituality or I practice meditation, because some social media guru or gurus have advocated it and it is supposed to radically enhance your wealth or this or that or whatever, if it's with an agenda, with an ulterior motive, then we're doing the thing, but we're defeating the purpose. When we give up that agenda, weirdly enough, this is the strange law of the universe. When you give up and you kind of surrender to the process, that word is very, very important. You surrender to the process. Whether it brings something or not, you give up that fight that it has to bring me something. Then, strangely enough, things begin to come.
It's so true.
Even at a material level. So now I do leadership programs using Calorie and this mental model of the warrior. And yes, I earn a little bit of money out of it. But that is not the reason why I do it. But not trying to, make a business out of Calorie has in a way had that also. But whether that happens or not is not the point. That is not the point at all. So to answer that question, like, meditation, etc., that you're talking about, yes, so discipline, so habits are usually like, we form habits, it's a little more external, it's more societal, like we are seeing, habits are in relation to society and all that. Discipline, again, think of a lot of Japanese arts, different forms, the tea ceremony or this kintsugi thing that they have where you, that's kintsugi, isn't it? Where you repair broken things with gold or something. Yeah, I think that's what it's called. So there's this beautiful thing that, so if you have a porcelain vase or something and it breaks, and you bring it back together by pouring molten gold, and so it holds it together. So it's called the beauty of broken things or the beauty of imperfect things. Or so many, or think of, the Japanese swords are called katanas, right? So you've seen Kill Bill, I'm sure, like everybody's seen Kill Bill. So the process of making that is like almost ridiculously complicated and long drawn, and the absolute devotion that is required to do something like that, or even something simple. There's this great, great book, one of my favorite books, Siddhartha by 𝐀𝐻𝐭𝐳. And in the end of that book, Siddhartha's name is the same as the Buddha, but he's not the Buddha, of course, it's just in the time of the Buddha. But he achieves his enlightenment in his own way. But he just becomes a boatman. He doesn't become some great spiritual master with thousands following. He just becomes a boatman, ferrying people across from one shore of the river to the other. Discipline that comes from that inner space is the same as love. So I sometimes say discipline is just love made visible. That's all.
Wow. That's powerful. Arka, thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah.
Before we end the podcast and our wonderful conversation, for those viewing this online, I had requested you if you could show some demonstrations in some part.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, in our style of Calorie, it begins with a salutation. Like yoga also begins with the sun salutation, many schools of yoga. Similarly, this starts with what we call a Calorie Vandana. And I'll give a little introduction, then I'll do the thing. So this is paying your respect to the Calorie. So as soon as you step into the Calorie, you do that. And it's typically practiced early in the morning, right? And the other thing about traditional Calories is that they're always east facing. So the early rays of the sun come into the Calorie. Now, you do this also standing in that east-west meridian. And as you shall see, you kind of bow down to the earth and you stretch up to the sky. So it's like you dedicate yourself to the earth and the sky. And what this means for me, and I use this in my leadership sessions also, is first of all, there's this connection with the cardinal directions and with nature, that everything we do is grounded in nature. We belong to nature and nature does not belong to us. And if only a lot of things in our modern, so-called modern age, if it could start with this as a given, that in whatever we do, whether it's industry or this or that, the sanctity of the earth and the environment is the first given, instead of how we can exploit it. If that could be a value system, things would be so different. First point. Second point is that bowing down to the earth symbolically for me is, what are my values? Like, what am I standing on? What is the ground, literally or metaphorically, that I'm standing on? So as a warrior, what are the fundamental values that I embody? Similarly, stretching out to the sun for me is like, what is my purpose? What pulls me, just as the sun is kind of pulling me? So what pulls me? What is my purpose? And also, what am I aligned with? That east-west alignment. So what am I aligning myself with? So metaphors are not just words. For me, over the years, this salutation itself has become a very deep experiential metaphor, and something I've used with, in programs with CXOs and stuff, and a lot of deep reflections can come out of it. So I'll just show it.
Wow.
So the first thing is to stand your ground. So we stand like this, left leg in front, neither too far back nor too far forward. You're centered like this. Find your breath. Stand strong and tall, which means that your feet really stand firm upon the ground. Shoulders open, relaxed. And at the same time, it's like you're trying to grow tall through your neck, through your head, like a tree. And then we do this. It's just like the tree position in yoga. And then you go forward, and as I said, you bend to the earth, stretch out to the sky, and then come to yourself. Same with the other side of your body, so symmetry and harmony. And we end, right? Going back to where we started. And then we bow down to the earth again. So that's the salutation, for example.
It requires an incredible amount of balance, along with, of course, strength.
It requires and it gives you that balance also over years of practice. And then again, you learn that the balance is more in the mind than the body. It's in the breath. It's the better you can regulate your breath, the balance gets better.
Arka, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation, for giving us more insights about awakening the warrior within, about Kalaripayattu, and about how one can use martial arts in a way to deflate the ego and enhance oneself at the same time. Lastly, you showed us a beautiful demonstration. Once again, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation.
My pleasure. My pleasure.